It's 9,000 years ago. You're standing somewhere in what will one day be called Europe. Not a king, not a farmer, not anyone history will remember. Just a human, trying to survive the day. Your skin is dark. Not tan, not olive. Dark. The same deep pigment every single human on Earth has carried for 250,000 years. You have no idea that in a few thousand years, almost everyone standing where you are will look nothing like you. Paler skin, lighter eyes, a change so fast that when scientists finally dug up the proof, a 7,000-year-old skeleton in a Spanish cave, and cracked open its DNA in 2014, the results didn't make sense at first. Dark skin, blue eyes, a combination nobody predicted. You are standing in the middle of one of the fastest transformations in the history of our species, and you have absolutely no idea it's happening. So let's rewind further. Not 9,000 years, 300,000. That's roughly when Homo sapiens first shows up in the fossil record, in Africa. And here's the part most people skip past without noticing. Every one of them was dark-skinned. Not most, not the majority. All of them. There was no light skin anywhere on the planet, because there were no humans anywhere except under one of the strongest suns on Earth. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't cosmetic. Your skin has a layer of cells called melanocytes, and they produce a pigment called melanin. Melanin's job is simple. Absorb ultraviolet radiation before it gets deep enough to cause damage. More melanin, darker skin, better shield. And under equatorial sunlight, that shield wasn't optional. Because UV doesn't just burn skin, it breaks down a molecule your body needs, called folate, a B vitamin essential for cell division, DNA repair, and healthy pregnancies. Damage folate at scale, and reproduction gets harder. In evolution, that's the one failure mode that actually matters. You can be strong, clever, fast. If you can't successfully have children, none of it gets passed on. So near the equator, natural selection did the obvious thing. It pushed melanin production up, hard, generation after generation, until dark skin wasn't a variation. It was the baseline, the starting setting for the whole species. Which means the question was never, why did some humans get dark skin? The real question is the one almost nobody asks. Why did anyone lose it? The answer starts with movement. Beginning somewhere around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, groups of humans began pushing out of Africa, following coastlines, crossing land bridges opened up by shifting climates, chasing herds into territory no human had ever stood in before. And the further they walked from the equator, the sun itself began to change. Not in temperature, in angle. Near the equator, sunlight hits the ground almost straight on. Near the poles, it comes in at a shallow slant, traveling through far more atmosphere before it reaches you, which filters out most of the UVB, the specific band of sunlight your skin uses to manufacture vitamin D. And vitamin D isn't optional either. It's what lets your body absorb calcium, build bone density, and keep your immune system functioning. Without it, children develop rickets, a disease where bones soften and bend under the body's own weight. Pregnancy gets riskier. Everything gets harder. So now, the same shield that had been essential in Africa became a liability further north. Dark skin, built to block as much as roughly 90% of incoming UV, was perfect when the sun was blasting down at full strength. But in a place where the sun barely clears the horizon for half the year, blocking most of an already weak signal doesn't leave nearly enough UVB to make the vitamin D a body needs. This is the trade that defines the whole story. Block too much sun, and you starve your bones. Block too little, and you damage your DNA and your fertility. Every population that ever left Africa had to find its own answer to that same equation. So if the pressure was there, if dark skin really was a disadvantage in low UV Europe, evolution should have solved it fast, right? It didn't. And that's where this story gets genuinely strange. Here's a fact that quietly breaks the tidy version of this story that most people have in their heads. If Northern Europe really did start pushing for lighter skin the moment humans arrived, somewhere around 45,000 years ago, the math says dark skin should have disappeared from the population within a few downside years. Instead, genetic evidence shows something almost unbelievable. As recently as 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, most of the hunter-gatherers living across Europe were still dark-skinned. This isn't speculation. It's written directly into ancient DNA. In 2014, researchers sequenced the genome of a skeleton nicknamed Braña 1, a hunter-gatherer who died in a cave in northern Spain, roughly 7,000 years ago. When the results came back, the pigmentation genes matched what you'd expect to see in a modern sub-Saharan African population: dark skin. And sitting right alongside that result, the genetic markers for blue eyes. A pairing the researchers didn't expect, and by their own account, couldn't quite believe at first. A few years later, a second skeleton, Cheddar Man, found in England and dated to about 10,000 years ago, turned up the same unlikely combination. Two countries, thousands of years and hundreds of miles apart, telling the same story. Now, this delay wasn't perfectly even across the continent. Some northern populations picked up light-skin gene variants earlier than their neighbors did. A group in Sweden from around 7,700 years ago already carried them, while hunter-gatherers in Spain and Hungary from a similar era still didn't. So this wasn't one light switch flipping across all of Europe on the same day. But the overall pattern holds. Taken as a whole, dark skin persisted for tens of thousands of years longer than the simple story predicts. So what was blocking evolution's obvious fix for over 30,000 years? Not sunlight. Food. Vitamin D doesn't only come from your own skin manufacturing it. It also comes from what you eat. And hunter-gatherer diets across Ice Age Europe were loaded with exactly the foods that matter most: fatty fish, animal liver, eggs, marine mammals, all naturally rich in vitamin D. If your diet is already supplying what your skin isn't, the pressure to lighten your skin quietly fades. A hunter-gatherer eating a steady diet of fish and game could stay dark-skinned through a northern winter and still have enough vitamin D to build strong bones and carry a healthy pregnancy. The genetic problem evolution was supposedly trying to fix wasn't actually a problem yet, because the diet was covering for it. Which means the real trigger for widespread light skin in Europe was never the move north itself. It was what came after. Around 10,000 years ago, farming began spreading into Europe from the Near East. And it rewrote almost everything about how people ate, for better and for worse. Diets that had been built around fish, organ meat, and wild game shifted toward grains, wheat, barley, and other cultivated crops. Nutritionally dense in some ways, calorically reliable, but almost empty of vitamin D. The dietary safety net that had let hunter-gatherers keep their dark skin through thousands of years of weak northern sunlight vanished, in evolutionary terms, almost overnight. That's when the slow-motion selection pressure that had been sitting dormant for 30,000 plus years suddenly had teeth. Without dietary vitamin D, and without enough UVB getting through dark skin, deficiency became a real physical cost. Weaker bones, harder pregnancies, higher childhood mortality. Individuals who happened to carry mutations for slightly lighter skin could pull in more of the limited UVB available and produce enough vitamin D anyway. Their children survived at higher rates. Their genes spread. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Light skin in Europe isn't an ancient adaptation slowly built up over 300,000 years of living in a cold climate. Most of it swept through the population within the last 8,000 to 12,000 years, after farming began, not after humans first arrived in Europe. Genetically speaking, light skin in Europe is closer in age to the invention of writing than it is to the first humans who ever set foot on the continent. That's the reveal buried in your hook. The transformation wasn't just fast, it was recent enough that it happened after agriculture, after villages, after some of the earliest chapters of recorded human culture had already begun. So what actually flipped at the level of DNA? 3 genes did most of the work. SLC24A5 and SLC45A2 both affect how much melanin your skin cells produce, and specific mutated versions of each spread rapidly through European populations, sharply reducing pigment output. A third gene, HERC2, sits right next to OCA2 and controls it like a dimmer switch. One particular variant of HERC2 is the reason blue eyes kept turning up alongside dark skin in those ancient skeletons. A pairing that looks like a contradiction, but is really just 2 separate dimmer switches getting flipped on different timelines. Researchers studying the age of these mutations have traced the SLC24A5 variant's rapid spread to somewhere in the range of 11,000 to 19,000 years ago, lining up almost exactly with the agricultural shift. A cause and an effect written directly into the human genome. But here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If one set of genes explains Europe, does the same set explain everywhere else pale skin shows up? It doesn't. And that's usually where this story stops, because most explainers treat Europe as the whole story. It isn't. Here's the detail that almost never makes it into these videos, and it might be the single strangest fact in the entire topic. East Asian populations evolved lighter skin too. Same outcome, same UV-driven pressure. But when researchers went looking for the genes responsible, what they found wasn't a repeat performance. It was a different cast altogether. SLC24A5, the gene that did most of the work in Europe, is barely a factor in East Asian light skin at all. Instead, a separate mutation in the OCA2 gene evolved on its own in East Asian populations, reaching much the same result through a different molecular pathway. 2 populations, thousands of miles apart, facing the identical environmental problem: not enough UV to make vitamin D through dark skin. And evolution answered with 2 unrelated fixes. Biologists call this convergent evolution, the same phenomenon that gave both bats and birds wings, despite 0 shared ancestry in flight. Nature didn't have one blueprint for light skin. It solved the same equation twice, with different tools each time. That one fact quietly undercuts the old idea that skin color sorts humans into clean, separate categories. If light skin in Europe and light skin in East Asia came from different mutations altogether, then light-skinned was never one biological thing to begin with. It's a description of an outcome, not a shared ancestry. One more twist, because this story refuses to sit still. The Khoisan peoples of southern Africa, including the Khoikhoi and San, have noticeably lighter skin than most other sub-Saharan African populations. The obvious assumption, for years, was recent mixing with European colonizers. Genetic analysis found something stranger. The light skin variant of SLC24A5 in the Khoisan traces back to a migration event roughly 2,000 years ago. The allele moving south from Eastern African populations, who had picked it up through earlier contact with Eurasian groups, centuries before any European ship reached the continent. So the same mutation that swept across Europe also, on its own timeline, swept back through populations in Africa, thousands of years later, in a completely different context. Skin color genetics never moved in one clean direction, out of Africa and no further. It moved back in, too. So, how did ancient humans get lighter skin? Not because of cold weather. Cold doesn't bleach skin. Low UV does, and those aren't the same map. Not because light skin is some advanced or superior version of an original design. Every shade of human skin alive today is a working solution to a specific environment, not a rank on a ladder. And not through one event, one gene, or one population acting alone. It happened because a species built for the equator kept walking further from it, carrying a genetic shield that started working against its own bones. It stayed hidden for tens of thousands of years because diet was picking up the slack. And it finally broke loose, fast, recently, almost by accident, the moment farming pulled that dietary safety net away. Go back to that person standing in ancient Europe from the start of this video. Dark skin, no idea what's coming. They weren't a different kind of human waiting to become something else. They were proof that the same body can be reshaped by nothing more than food, latitude, and time. Over and over, in different places, using different genetic tools, arriving at the same visible result. Every shade of human skin alive today is a record of exactly where someone's ancestors stood under the sun, and exactly what they were eating while they stood there. Nothing mystical about it, and nothing less remarkable either. And here's the question that makes this bigger than one story about skin. If something this visible, the color of your own skin, turns out to be one of the newest, fastest moving features of the human body, rather than one of the oldest, what else got rewritten just as recently? Why can some adults drink milk without getting sick, and others can't? That one's less than 10,000 years old too, and it's the next thing worth digging into. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling that thread.